Hello everybody, my name is Shortline 614 and welcome to episode 8, I think, of Shortline Space Program. In the last episode, we sent up our fairly mediocre relay network around Minmus, but in this episode, we are sending up Minmus Express, which is a... how do I even describe it? There's a lot in that payload fairing. There's a relay satellite, there's 4 landers, and there's 2 rovers that are going to go out and explore Minmus for us, just to get to know what all of its secrets and whatnot. So we launched this on a Chesapeake 5.0, of course, 5 cores, no boosters, and that fairing is quite ridiculous because I had to fit all of this in there. And as you can see, there's that relay satellite which is based off of or that scanning satellite which is based off my relay satellite. There's 2 small rovers with sky cranes, and there's 4 small landers. And in order to launch this monstrosity, I need to have an extra wide payload fairing, so that's why it suddenly cuts to from 2.5 meters to 3.5 meters, and why I used a Chesapeake 5.0. But of course, this isn't going to Columbia Station because I still want that tug out at Minmus. I'm not going to spoil the mission, but stuff doesn't really go to plan. But that's normal. But so yeah, we get into a nice parking orbit around Kerbin, and then I do manage to get a Minmus trajectory fairly early on. This one doesn't fly past the Mun this time. So as you can see on the actual Minmus Express payload, I kind of have a truss segment where I mounted all of these on, because this is a lot, frankly. Which is funny, because that entire thing only weighs about 10 tons, but I couldn't use a Chesapeake 3.0 and have the margins that I wanted. So, of course, we're doing this the magic of 5 times speed. We get into a nice orbit around Minmus, and now I try to adjust this into this orbit. Now, fun fact, I did actually come in a retrograde orbit, so I end up orbiting the wrong way around. But I only realized this later on. So we do end up releasing that satellite into a retrograde orbit. So that's a Minmus Express scanning probe. And that, of course, has a ground scanner. It has a relay on it. And what we're going to do is we're going to get it into a 150 by 150 orbit around the poles in a polar orbit. And then we're going to use those instruments to scan for ore. And we're going to use it to map waypoints, note places of notoriety where we might want to land those rovers and those probes. So yeah, just using the RCS to get into a standard orbit. You might realize that I have changed profile pictures. That is thanks to the great Isaiah from Missouri, who a truly epic gamer friend of mine who made it. Because he wants to get KSP, and that's epic. More people playing this game, that is very epic. Very nice. And, so yeah, obviously just getting this into its proper orbit. At this point I realized, hey, wait a second, this is orbiting retrograde. But, I end up, it really doesn't need to orbit. This is just going to be orbiting scanning for stuff. It's not going to rendezvous with anything else. And I might send up a tug here eventually and, put it into the right orbit, but... anyways, at this point, I rename it retrograde just to suit my things. And then I deploy, I have those are on, of course, hinges, so they deploy out that way. And then I start deploying the scanners. And I start orbiting around, take some nice pictures. I think that's the thumbnail, actually. And I start looking for ore, and I start fiddling around with the scanner. And I think I get it to 60% ore, and of course there's a lot of ore in the poles, but there's a lot of ore in that one of those sea level valley areas. So I immediately take out our narrowband scanner, and I put down some waypoints of potentially interesting areas that we're going to set down those landers and those rovers at. And so I obviously fiddle around with it more, just trying to see, is there any other areas with kind of high concentration of ore that would be interesting. So I had an idea where, how about I land on some of the Minmus Highlands, because those are particularly interesting areas that you can land on. So I set the target there, and then I'm like, well, the poles have a lot of ore, so how about I set them on the poles. So we have, of course, 2 rovers, and I think I'm going to send them. I decided at this point I'm going to send one of the rovers to the lowlands, one to the highlands, and I'm going to send 4 the small landers. 2 are going to go on the poles, and then one's going to go on the highlands, and one's going to go on the lowlands. And of course, I end up switching back to the main Minmus Express bus tug, and then I put it in a prograde orbit, so I'm orbiting around with the rest of everything. And I fly in very, very close to Minmus, about 20 kilometers is where I want to circularize around, because I want to stay in close, because those landers, they only have a limited number of fuel. And at this point I was concerned I wouldn't have enough, but that turns out not to be a problem later on. There's Minmus, the dirty snowball of or dirty ice cream, or whatever the heck you want to call it. I decide that my first landing is going to be on the South Pole, so I take one of these landers, which I just end up bouncing it off the other side. And it has a bunch of solar panels, it has some antenna, it has one of those smaller engines, and has landing gear, and it's going to land on the South Pole. In the dim twilight of the South Pole, I had to make sure that I would land in an area that wasn't completely covered in darkness, because otherwise those solar panels won't do a lot of good use. But these are just scouts. They're not really meant to do any kind of real science or looking around. They're more like, yeah, this is an area where it's potentially interesting. We just want to get like a general feeling of the area, so that it might be home to a potential base in the future. Maybe some Kerbals will come out here and explore it. But that's a fairly long way off, so I try to get as close to the waypoint as possible. And later on, I just kind of gave up on doing that, because I'm like, if you just land in the general area, that's really good enough. And of course, Minmus isn't like the Mun. It's a lot smaller and has a lot less gravity, so as you can see, I actually have enough Delta V to probably go back in this probe to actually go back to Kerbin, but that was an oversight on my part. So, I slowly begin our descent. I end up deploying the landing gear, and we actually came down almost exactly on the South Pole, because there's some glitches in the terrain where the terrain kind of clips. You can see one right there. But I also come down on a massive as heck slope. So I was concerned that, well, I don't want this thing to fall over. That's quite the slope there, and I was kind of concerned that this thing would fall over. And so I decided to say, screw it, I'm not landing. I'm not staying on this slope. I'm going somewhere else. And so we're kind of in we're obviously at the South Pole. We're in a crater, I guess, the South Pole crater, I guess, in a valley. So I'm like, maybe I can land at the center of this valley, and then the slope won't be, or at least near it, and then the slope won't be, it will be shallow enough so that I can easily put this down. Which, that ends up happening. This is it's not perfectly flat, but it's flat enough for our liking. So we come down in this nice valley area. Luckily there is the sun, of course, will skip across those the tops of the mountains, providing us just enough power to keep this thing afloat, keep this thing alive using those solar panels. And we got relatively close, and so I end up renaming it Lander 1 and South Pole. So that is Lander 1, and there's the sun, and it, goes across the horizon, and of course that probe is going into hibernation mode, so it's the only thing that's really active is the communication and the solar panels. And, when the sun drifts across that sky, it will gain power, and then when it goes underneath the hills, it has a battery and it has a battery which will keep it through that area. And there's apparently I do a bit of a hop there, but that is the first probe. Now it is the second probe, which we are going to be landing on the North Pole. So I skip off that area as well. At this point I realize, hey, there's an action group to deploy all these things. So this is fairly similar. I wanted to get into an area where the sun is present for at least part of the time, because as I said, this thing is solar driven, and I still wanted to get close to the actual marker itself. These markers are really useful if you don't pass up the opportunity to launch one of those narrowband scanners on a probe, because especially if you're trying to explore Minmus and colonize Minmus like I want to do in the very near future. So this is basically more of the same. You know, I end up, you know, killing all my lateral velocity, and I just start falling towards the surface. There's Kerbin, there's the sun, everything is oh so beautiful. And we're coming down in a very similar area, another valley of some sort, but you know, this one is a lot more flat than the last one. On the other one, we were surrounded by three very tall mountains. And in this one, there are just gentle hills in the background. So that's really it for part 1 of Minmus Express. In the next episode, we'll land those other probes and those rovers. And of course, you know, I end up renaming the probe as well, and everything is oh so beautiful in this game. I rename it Lander 2. But anyways, thank you all for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, tell me what you think. Follow me on BitChute, you know, all that stuff, YouTube. Join the Discord server. And I do streams fairly often. And my name is Shortline614, and I'll see y'all in the next one, part 2 of Minmus Express. Goodbye.